A city built on mud and shepherd's blood would one day command 60 million souls across 3 continents. That is the story of Rome. It begins not with marble, but with thatch and smoke rising from hut villages on the Palatine Hill, 1,000 years before the Common Era. From those humble origins, something relentless took shape, something that absorbed Etruscan kings, Greek philosophy, and Latin stubbornness, then forged them into the most enduring political experiment the ancient world ever produced. This is the complete journey, from Bronze Age settlements above the Tiber to the expulsion of tyrant kings, from the iron discipline of the Republic to the catastrophe at Cannae and the ashes of Carthage, from Caesar's crossing of the Rubicon to Augustus razing Rome in marble, from the Colosseum's roar to the quiet meditations of Marcus Aurelius on a frozen Danube frontier, from the crisis that nearly shattered everything to Constantine's new capital on the Bosphorus, from the last Western emperor surrendering his throne to Ottoman cannons, breaching the walls of Constantinople in 1453. More than 1.5 billion people today speak languages born from Latin. Over 150 nations build their legal systems on Roman foundations. The words republic, senate, and citizen are Roman gifts to the modern world. If you enjoy complete journeys through the rise and fall of civilizations, subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Let us begin where Rome itself began, in the soft volcanic soil of Latium. The hills rise gently from the floodplain, 7 low ridges of volcanic tufa, shaped by millennia of rain and wind, their slopes thick with oak and wild olive. Below them, the Tiber bends westward towards the sea, brown and heavy with silt, carving a shallow valley through the soft stone of central Italy. Where the river narrows near an island of gravel and reeds, the water runs shallow enough to cross on foot. This crossing, this single fordable point along miles of riverbank, is the reason everything begins here. Sometime around 1,000 years before the Common Era, small communities of Latin-speaking farmers and herders settle on the hilltops above the marshes. The Palatine Hill, steep-sided and defensible, holds the earliest traces. Post holes cut into the bedrock reveal the outlines of oval huts, their walls of wattle and daub, their roofs thatched with straw and supported by a central timber post. Hearths of packed clay sit at the center of each dwelling. Cooking pots of coarse brown ware, spindle whorls, and bronze fibulo lie scattered in the soil, the quiet residue of lives lived close to the earth. Archaeologists date these remains to roughly 900 to 800 years before the Common Era. The people who built them are pastoralists and subsistence farmers, growing emmer wheat and barley on the hillsides, grazing sheep and goats on the lower slopes, burying their dead in simple pit graves in the Forum Valley below. That valley is a swamp. Rainwater drains from the surrounding hills into a low basin choked with sedge and standing water. Malaria haunts the wet season. The dead are interred at its edges, in a cemetery that later generations will pave over and forget. For now, the living keep to the heights. To the north, a far more sophisticated civilization flourishes. The Etruscans have built walled cities at Tarquinia, Cerveteri, and Veii, places of painted underground tombs, terracotta temple decorations, bronze mirrors, and gold jewelry of extraordinary refinement. Their engineers drain marshland, build roads, and channel water through carved stone conduits. Their merchants trade with Phoenicians and Greeks, importing painted pottery and exporting iron from the mines of Elba. Their alphabet, adapted from Greek, records a language still only partially understood. Their influence seeps southward into the Latin settlements, carrying with it new technologies, religious practices, and political models. To the south, Greek colonists have planted cities along the coast: Cumae, Neapolis, Tarentum, bringing temple architecture in dressed stone, the alphabet that the Latins will eventually adopt through Etruscan intermediaries, and the culture of the Mediterranean's eastern shores. Rome sits between these worlds. Tradition holds that Romulus founded the city in 753 years before the Common Era, tracing a sacred boundary with a bronze plough around the Palatine. Archaeology cannot confirm a single founder, but it reveals something equally significant. By the mid-8th century, the scattered hut villages on the Palatine, Esquiline, and Caelian hills begin to coalesce. Shared burial grounds give way to a common civic space. The marshy Forum Valley is gradually drained, first by simple ditches, later by the great stone channel known as the Cloaca Maxima, an engineering achievement bearing unmistakable Etruscan influence. 7 kings rule Rome according to tradition. The last 3, Tarquinius Priscus, Servius Tullius, and Tarquinius Superbus, bear Etruscan names or connections. Under their reigns, Rome transforms from a cluster of villages into a true city. The Forum is paved. A massive temple to Jupiter. Optimus Maximus rises on the Capitoline Hill, its wooden superstructure crowned with Etruscan terracotta sculptures, its triple cellar housing Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva. Servius Tullius organizes the population into classes based on wealth, creating the census and the Comitia Centuriata, an assembly that ties military obligation to political voice. But kingship carries the seed of its own destruction. Tarquinius Superbus rules as a tyrant, and around 509 years before the Common Era, the Roman aristocracy expels him. In his place, they establish something unprecedented: a republic governed by 2 annually elected consuls, checked by a senate of elder statesmen. The age of kings ends in the same mud from which it rose, and Rome steps into a future no hut village on a hilltop could have imagined. 2 consuls now sit where 1 king once ruled. Each holds power for a single year, each can veto the other, and both answer to a body of elder patricians whose collective memory stretches back generations. The republic is born fragile, surrounded by enemies, and riven from within by a fault line that will take 2 centuries to close. The early Forum is a modest rectangle of packed earth, flanked by wooden shops and small temples of tufa block. At its northern end stands the Comitium, the open-air assembly ground where citizens gather to vote and hear disputes. Nearby, the Rostra, a speaker's platform decorated with the bronze prows of captured warships, gives voice to magistrates and tribunes. Rome, in the 5th century before the Common Era, is not yet a city of marble. It is a city of clay, timber, and iron will. The struggle of the orders defines the Republic's first 200 years. Patricians monopolize the consulship, the priesthoods, and the courts. Plebeians, farmers, artisans, soldiers demand a share of power. In 494 before the Common Era, the plebeians withdraw from the city entirely, encamping on the sacred mount in the first of several secessions. The patricians yield. The tribunate of the plebs is created, an office whose holders possess sacrosanctity and the power to block any act of government. Around 450 before the Common Era, a commission of 10 men inscribes Roman customary law onto 12 bronze tablets and displays them in the forum. The 12 tables do not grant equality, but they make the law visible, knowable, no longer the secret possession of patrician priests. Over the following century, plebeians win access to the consulship, the censorship, and the major priesthoods. In 287 before the Common Era, the Lex Hortensia declares that resolutions of the plebeian assembly carry the force of law for all citizens. The Constitution is never written in a single document. It lives in precedent, custom, and the tension between competing magistracies. Meanwhile, Rome fights. The Latin League, once an alliance of equals, chafes under Roman dominance. The Latin War of 340 to 338 before the Common Era ends with Rome dissolving the League entirely, binding some cities with full citizenship, others with limited rights, and still others as allies obligated to supply troops. This graduated system of incorporation becomes Rome's most powerful weapon, not the sword, but the treaty. The Samnites of the Central Apennines prove far more stubborn. 3 wars span from 343 to 290 before the Common Era. Samnite warriors fight in loose formations across mountain terrain, and at the Caudine Forks in 321, they trap and humiliate an entire Roman army. Rome adapts. The rigid phalanx gives way to the manipular legion, flexible units of 120 men arranged in 3 lines, armed with the heavy javelin called the pilum and the short thrusting sword called the gladius. Centurions enforce discipline with vine staffs, engineers build roads. The Via Appia, begun in 312 before the Common Era by the censor Appius Claudius Caecus, drives southeast from Rome to Capua, its surface of fitted basalt blocks cutting through marshland and mountain pass alike. Roads carry legions at speed, bind colonies to the capital, and transform geography into strategy. By 275 before the Common Era, Rome controls the Italian peninsula from the Arno to the Strait of Messina. The Greek cities of the south, Tarentum, Neapolis, Croton, fall into Rome's orbit after the war against King Pyrrhus of Epirus, whose costly victories between 280 and 275 give the world a phrase for triumph indistinguishable from defeat. Pyrrhus withdraws to Greece. Tarentum surrenders. Latin colonies dot the landscape from the Adriatic to the Tyrrhenian coast, each a miniature Rome with its own forum, walls, and census. The republic that emerges by 264 before the Common Era governs not through a sprawling bureaucracy, but through a web of alliances, colonies, and roads. Its army is a citizen militia organized by the census, its officers are elected politicians, and its constitution is a living argument between classes. Across the narrow Strait of Messina, the island of Sicily glitters with Greek temples and Carthaginian trading posts. Rome's gaze turns outward, toward the sea. The Strait of Messina is barely 3 kilometers wide, a sliver of blue water separating the Italian peninsula from Sicily, and in 264 before the Common Era, Rome crosses it. The decision draws the Republic into collision with Carthage, a Phoenician trading empire whose capital sits on the North African coast near modern Tunis, its circular military harbor sheltering 200 warships, its merchant fleet dominating every sea lane from the Pillars of Hercules to the Libyan shore. Carthage is older than Rome, richer than Rome, and supreme at sea. Rome has no navy. The First Punic War begins over the contested city of Messana and quickly escalates into a struggle for all of Sicily. Roman legions prove effective on land, but the island cannot be won without controlling the surrounding waters. In an act of extraordinary ambition, Rome builds a fleet from nothing, reportedly copying a captured Carthaginian quinquereme and training rowers on wooden frames set up on dry land. Engineers devise the corvus, a hinged boarding bridge with an iron spike that locks onto an enemy deck, transforming naval engagements into the close infantry combat where Roman soldiers excel. At Myle in 260, the consul Gaius Julius wins Rome's first major naval victory. The war grinds on for 23 years, consuming fleets on both sides. Storms alone destroy hundreds of Roman ships and tens of thousands of men. Yet the Republic's capacity to absorb catastrophic losses and rebuild proves decisive. In 241, a final Roman fleet shatters the Carthaginian navy off the Aegates Islands. Carthage sues for peace, surrenders Sicily, and pays a massive indemnity. Sicily becomes Rome's first overseas province, administered by a praetor and taxed in grain. The peace lasts barely a generation. Carthage rebuilds its power in Hispania under the Barcid family, and in 218, Hannibal Barca marches an army of perhaps 50,000 infantry, 9,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants from New Carthage across southern Gaul and over the Alps in autumn. The crossing costs him nearly half his force to rock falls, hostile tribes, and freezing mountain passes, but the survivors descend into the Po Valley and begin dismantling Roman armies with terrifying efficiency. At the Trebia in December of 218, at Lake Trasimene in June of 217, Hannibal destroys consular forces through ambush and tactical brilliance. Then comes Cannae. On the 2nd of August, 216 before the Common Era, on a flat plain near the Aufidus River in Apulia, Hannibal faces the largest army Rome has ever assembled, perhaps 86,000 men. He allows his center to bend inward under Roman pressure, then closes his African infantry and cavalry around both flanks in a double envelopment that becomes the most studied tactical maneuver in military history. Between 50,000 and 70,000 Romans die in a single afternoon. The disaster shakes the alliance system to its core. Capua defects, Syracuse revolts, Philip V of Macedon allies with Hannibal, yet Rome refuses to negotiate. The strategy shifts to attrition under Fabius Maximus, avoiding pitched battle while recapturing allied cities one by one. Hannibal remains in Italy for over a decade, winning engagements but unable to take Rome itself. Meanwhile, the young Publius Cornelius Scipio carries the war to Hispania, defeats Carthaginian forces there by 206, and then crosses to North Africa. Carthage recalls Hannibal. At Zama in 202, Scipio neutralizes the war elephants, and his cavalry completes the encirclement. Carthage accepts devastating terms. Its fleet reduced to 10 ships, its territory confined, its independence effectively ended. Half a century of simmering resentment follows. Carthage recovers commercially but remains militarily crippled. In Rome, the elderly Senator Cato concludes every speech, regardless of topic, with the same demand. In 149, Rome finds its pretext and besieges Carthage. The city resists for 3 years with desperate courage, its people melting temple roofs for weapons. In the spring of 146, Scipio Aemilianus breaches the walls. Street by street, House by house, the city burns. The survivors, perhaps 50,000, are sold into slavery. Ancient sources claim the Romans plough salt into the earth, though this detail remains disputed. In the same year, the consul Lucius Mummius sacks Corinth, and Greece passes under Roman control. The western Mediterranean belongs to Rome alone, and the republic that once feared the sea now commands it entirely. The wealth arrives before the wisdom to manage it. In the decades after 146 before the Common Era, gold and silver pour into Rome from sacked cities across the Mediterranean. Carthaginian treasuries, Corinthian bronzes, Macedonian mines, the accumulated riches of civilizations centuries older than the Republic itself. Slave markets overflow. Tens of thousands of war captives from Spain, Greece, Africa, and Asia Minor flood the Italian peninsula, their labor so cheap it transforms the economics of agriculture overnight. Across Campania, Etruria, Apulia, and Sicily, wealthy senators and equestrians purchase vast tracts of public land, the Ager Publicus, and consolidate them into enormous estates called latifundia. Olive groves and vineyards stretch to the horizon, worked by chained gangs of slaves under the supervision of overseers carrying whips. The small freehold farmers who once formed the backbone of the legions find themselves unable to compete. They sell their plots, drift into Rome, and join a swelling urban population that depends increasingly on subsidized grain. The city itself is changing. Rome in the late 2nd century before the Common Era is a metropolis of perhaps 400,000, its streets choked with traffic, its tenement blocks, the insulae, rising 5 and 6 stories above narrow alleys prone to fire and collapse. The Forum hums with political energy, but the old consensus between patricians and plebeians has frayed. Two factions crystallize: the Optimates, who defend senatorial privilege and tradition, and the Populares, who appeal to the assemblies and the dispossessed. In 133, a young tribune named Tiberius Gracchus proposes the Lex Agraria, a land reform bill that would redistribute portions of the Ager Publicus to landless citizens, enforcing an old limit of 500 jugera per holder. The Senate recoils. When a fellow tribune vetoes the bill, Tiberius takes the unprecedented step of having him deposed by the assembly. The law passes, but Tiberius has shattered constitutional norms. When he seeks a second consecutive tribunate, itself an alarming breach of custom, a mob of senators and their clients beats him to death on the Capitoline Hill. 300 of his supporters die with him. It is the first political murder in Rome in nearly 4 centuries of republican governance. A decade later, his younger brother Gaius Gracchus takes up the cause with broader ambitions. Between 123 and 121, Gaius pushes through grain subsidies, road-building programs, jury reform transferring courts from senators to equestrians, and a proposal to extend Roman citizenship to Latin allies. The Senate responds with the Senatus Consultum Ultimum, an emergency decree authorizing the consuls to use lethal force. Gaius dies in the violence that follows, and 3,000 of his supporters are executed without trial. The Gracchi are gone, but the problems they identified only deepen. In North Africa, the Juguthine War against the Numidian king Jugurtha drags on from 112 to 105, exposing senatorial incompetence and corruption. It is Gaius Marius, a novus homo from Arpinum with no noble ancestry, who finishes the war and then saves Italy from the terrifying Cimbri and Teutones, Germanic tribes who annihilate Roman armies at Arausio in 105 before Marius destroys them at Aquae Sextiae and Vercellae. Marius holds an unprecedented 7 consulships. More consequentially, he opens the legions to the landless poor, equipping them at state expense and promising them land upon discharge. The soldiers now owe their livelihoods not to the Republic, but to their commander. The final crisis of this era erupts from Rome's own allies. Italian communities that have fought and bled for Rome for generations demand the citizenship repeatedly denied them. In 91, the tribune Marcus Livius Drusus proposes enfranchisement and is assassinated. The Italian allies revolt. The social war from 91 to 88 devastates the peninsula. Perhaps 300,000 die on both sides. Rome wins militarily but concedes politically, extending citizenship to virtually all free Italians south of the Po River through the Lex Julia and the Lex Plautia Papiria. The Republic survives, but its old structures groan under pressures they were never designed to bear. Armed men loyal to individual generals, a city swollen with the displaced, a senate clinging to privilege. The machinery of governance built for a city-state now governs an empire, and the gears are grinding toward catastrophe. Lucius Cornelius Sulla does what no Roman commander has done before. In 88, before the Common Era, denied his eastern command by political maneuvering in the capital, he turns 6 legions south and marches them directly into Rome. The soldiers follow not the Senate's orders, but their general's promise of plunder. The streets of the city, built for processions and commerce, become corridors of armed combat. Sulla's enemies flee or die. The precedent is set. The Republic's most sacred boundary, the pomerium that separates civil from military authority, has been crossed by a Roman army, and the world does not end. It merely changes. Sulla departs for the east to fight Mithridates of Pontus, and in his absence his enemies seize Rome. Marius, old and bitter, returns for a 7th consulship, and unleashes a brief terror before dying in January of 86. When Sulla returns victorious in 83, civil war engulfs Italy again. By 82, he is master of Rome and names himself dictator, not for 6 months, as tradition allows, but indefinitely. White boards appear in the forum bearing lists of names. These are the prescriptions. Any citizen whose name appears may be killed on sight, his property confiscated, his sons and grandsons barred from office. Perhaps 4,700 die. Sulla then reshapes the constitution, doubling the Senate to 600, curtailing the tribune's power, and strengthening senatorial courts. In 79, astonishingly, he resigns and retires to his country estate, dying the following year. He believes he has restored the old order. He has instead demonstrated how to destroy it. The decade that follows reveals the Republic's fragility. In 73, a Thracian gladiator named Spartacus escapes from a training school at Capua with 70 companions. Within months, his force swells to perhaps 70,000. Runaway slaves, dispossessed laborers, desperate men from every corner of the Mediterranean. They defeat multiple Roman forces in open battle, ravaging southern Italy for 2 years. Marcus Licinius Crassus finally crushes the revolt in 71, crucifying 6,000 captives along the Appian Way from Capua to Rome. Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, returning from Spain, claims credit for mopping up survivors. Both men leverage their armies into consulships for 70. Pompey and Crassus dominate the 60s, but neither can rule alone. Pompey clears the Mediterranean of pirates in a single campaign and conquers the eastern kingdoms, reorganizing Syria and doubling Rome's revenue. Crassus, the richest man in the Republic, seeks military glory to match. Meanwhile, Marcus Tullius Cicero, a novus homo from Arpinum, reaches the consulship in 63 and suppresses the conspiracy of Lucius Sergius Catilina, executing the conspirators without trial, a decision that will haunt him. In 60, 3 men forge an informal alliance. Gaius Julius Caesar, deeply indebted and politically ambitious, brokers a pact with Pompey and Crassus. This so-called First Triumvirate secures Caesar the consulship for 59 and then a 5-year command in Gaul. Over the next 8 years, Caesar conquers the whole of Transalpine Gaul, crosses the Rhine, invades Britain twice, and kills or enslaves perhaps 1 million people. His commentaries, written in spare third-person Latin, make him famous in Rome. His legions, paid and promoted by his hand, become instruments of personal loyalty. Crassus dies at Carrhae in 53, his army annihilated by Parthian horse archers. The triumvirate collapses into a duel. The Senate, aligned with Pompey, orders Caesar to disband his legions. On the 10th of January, 49 before the Common Era, Caesar leads a single legion across the Rubicon, a shallow stream marking the boundary of his province. Civil war begins. Pompey retreats to Greece. At Pharsalus in August of 48, Caesar's outnumbered veterans shatter Pompey's larger force. Pompey flees to Egypt and is murdered on the beach. Caesar returns to Rome as dictator. He reforms the calendar, settles veterans on colonial land, extends citizenship to Cisalpine Gaul, and fills the Senate with loyalists. In February of 44, he accepts the title Dictator Perpetuo, Dictator in perpetuity. On the 15th of March, in a hall adjoining the theatre of Pompey, 23 senators surround him. The iron blades rise and fall. Caesar collapses at the base of Pompey's statue, struck 23 times. The conspirators, led by Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus, believe they have saved the Republic. Instead, they have guaranteed its final destruction. The blood on the marble is barely dry when the next war begins. Within days of Caesar's murder, his 18-year-old adopted heir, Gaius Octavius, arrives in Rome from Apollonia in Illyria, claims his inheritance, and takes the name Gaius Julius Caesar. He is slight, pale, and frequently ill, yet possesses a political instinct that will prove more lethal than any legionary's blade. Against him stands Mark Antony, Caesar's lieutenant, who controls the army and the consulship. Between them, the assassins Brutus and Cassius flee eastward to raise legions in Greece and Asia Minor. In November of 43 before the Common Era, Octavian, Antony, and Marcus Aemilius Lepidus form the Second Triumvirate, a legally sanctioned autocracy of 3. Their first act is the proscription, lists of enemies posted in the forum, names written on whitewashed boards. 300 senators and 2,000 equestrians are condemned. Among the dead is Marcus Tullius Cicero, the Republic's greatest orator, hunted down on a country road and beheaded. His hands, which wrote the Philippics against Antony, are nailed to the rostra. In the autumn of 42, at Philippi in Macedonia, the triumvir's combined legions crush the forces of Brutus and Cassius. Both conspirators die by their own swords. The Republic's last defenders are gone. The victors divide the Roman world. Antony takes the wealthy east, Octavian the volatile west, Lepidus the provinces of Africa. For a decade, this arrangement holds through treaties, marriages, and mutual suspicion. Antony entangles himself with Cleopatra VII of Egypt, distributing Roman territories to her children in the donations of Alexandria. Octavian seizes on this, framing Antony not as a rival Roman, but as a foreign queen's puppet. On the 2nd of September, 31 before the Common Era, the fleets meet at Actium, off the western coast of Greece. Octavian's admiral Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa commands lighter, faster warships that encircle Antony's heavy quinqueremes. Cleopatra's squadron breaks through and flees south. Antony follows. Their army, abandoned on shore, surrenders within days. The following summer, both Antony and Cleopatra take their own lives in Alexandria. Egypt becomes a Roman province, its grain reserves now feeding the capital directly. In January of 27 before the Common Era, Octavian stands before the Senate and offers to relinquish his extraordinary powers. The Senate, carefully managed, refuses and bestows upon him the title Augustus, the revered one. He retains command of the frontier provinces where the legions are stationed, controls foreign policy, and holds tribunician power that makes his person sacrosanct. The consulship, the Senate, the assemblies all continue to meet. The Republic's forms survive, but real authority flows from one man. Augustus rebuilds Rome in Carrara marble where tufa and brick once stood. The Forum of Augustus rises beside Caesar's, dominated by the temple of Mars Ultor, the Avenger. The Arapacis, an altar of Augustan peace, stands in the Campus Martius, its carved panels showing the imperial family in solemn procession among garlands of fruit and acanthus. He reorganizes the army into 28 permanent legions, roughly 150,000 men, stationed along the Rhine, the Danube, and the Euphrates. He creates the Praetorian Guard, 9 cohorts of elite soldiers based near Rome. He establishes the Aerarium Militare, a treasury funded by inheritance taxes to pay veterans' retirement, breaking the dangerous bond between soldiers and individual commanders. The poets Virgil, Horace, and Ovid flourish under his patronage. Livy composes his monumental history of Rome. Roads, aqueducts, and colonies spread across the provinces. The population of the capital reaches approximately 1 million souls, the largest city the Western world has ever known. Yet the machine has limits. In September of 9 of the Common Era, deep in the Teutoburg forest of Germania, an alliance of tribes led by Arminius annihilates 3 legions under Publius Quinctilius Verus, perhaps 15,000 soldiers lost in 3 days of ambush and rain. Augustus never recovers from the shock. The Rhine, not the Elbe, becomes the empire's permanent northern boundary. He dies at Nola on the 19th of August, 14 of the Common Era, at the age of 75. His final words, recorded by Suetonius, ask whether he has played his part well in the comedy of life. The Res Gestae, his own account of his achievements, is inscribed in bronze before his mausoleum. The Senate declares him a god. His stepson Tiberius succeeds him without civil war. The system holds. Tiberius inherits a machine built for one man's hands, and he holds it with reluctance. A career soldier, 65 years old at his accession, he governs competently for the first decade, maintaining Augustus's frontier policy, keeping the treasury solvent, restraining provincial governors from excessive taxation. But he trusts few and likes fewer. By 26 of the Common Era, he withdraws permanently to the island of Capri, governing the empire from the cliff-top Villa Jovis, perched 300 meters above the Tyrrhenian Sea. The Senate in Rome drifts into paralysis, terrified by treason trials orchestrated through the Praetorian prefect Sejanus, who accumulates power until Tiberius, from his island, orders his arrest and execution in 31 of the Common Era. When Tiberius dies in 37, few mourn him. His successor, Gaius Caesar, known as Caligula, a childhood nickname meaning little boot, given by soldiers who watched him toddle through legionary camps, begins with promise and collapses into erratic cruelty within months. He exhausts the surplus Tiberius carefully accumulated, humiliates senators, and declares himself a living god. After fewer than 4 years, officers of the Praetorian Guard murder him in a palace corridor in January of 41. They find his uncle Claudius hiding behind a curtain and declare him emperor. Claudius proves unexpectedly capable. Physically awkward, mocked by the court for his stammer and limp, he possesses a sharp administrative mind. He expands the imperial bureaucracy, granting real authority to freedmen secretaries who manage correspondence, finances, and petitions. In 43 of the Common Era, he launches the invasion of Britain, sending 4 legions across the Channel to establish a province that will endure for over 3.5 centuries. New aqueducts rise outside Rome. The harbor at Ostia is expanded. Yet palace intrigue consumes him. His 4th wife, Agrippina, poisons him in October of 54 to secure the throne for her son Nero. Nero is 16 at his accession, guided initially by the philosopher Seneca and the Praetorian prefect Burrus. The first 5 years pass in relative stability. Then restraint dissolves. Nero performs on public stages, races chariots, and murders his mother in 59. On the night of July 18th, 64, fire erupts near the Circus Maximus and burns for 9 days, consuming 10 of Rome's 14 districts. Nero builds his extravagant Domus Aurea, the Golden House, across the devastated center, its octagonal dining room rotating beneath a domed ceiling painted with stars. He deflects blame onto the small Christian community, subjecting them to public execution. The Pisonian conspiracy of 65 fails, and Seneca is ordered to take his own life. By 68, revolts erupt in Gaul and Spain. The Senate declares Nero a public enemy. He dies by his own hand in June. The year 69 shatters any illusion that imperial succession is orderly. 4 men claim the purple in 12 months: Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and finally Vespasian, a general commanding the siege of Jerusalem. Vespasian's forces prevail, and a new dynasty, the Flavians, takes power. A pragmatic administrator of Italian municipal stock, Vespasian restores fiscal discipline, imposes new taxes, and begins construction of the Flavian amphitheater, the Colosseum, on the drained lake of Nero's Golden House. His son Titus completes the siege of Jerusalem in 70, destroying the Second Temple and carrying its treasures to Rome, depicted forever on the Arch of Titus in the Forum. In August of 79, Vesuvius erupts. A column of pumice and ash rises 30 kilometers into the sky. Pompeii and Herculaneum vanish beneath meters of volcanic debris, preserving bakeries with bread still in ovens, frescoed dining rooms, and the contorted forms of those who could not flee. Titus, now emperor after Vespasian's death in June, directs relief efforts. The Colosseum opens in 80 with 100 days of games, gladiatorial combat, animal hunts, and staged naval battles. 50,000 spectators fill its travertine tiers. Titus dies in 81, succeeded by his younger brother Domitian, who rules with increasing autocracy for 15 years, rebuilding the Capitoline Temple and expanding the frontier in Germania. His insistence on being addressed as Lord and God alienates the Senate. On September 18, 96, members of his own household staff stab him to death. The Flavian dynasty ends in blood, as the Julio-Claudians did before it. The Senate chooses one of its own, the elderly Nerva, and a new principle emerges: adoption rather than blood as the path to the purple. Nerva is old, frail, and without an heir of his body. His reign lasts barely 16 months, but in that slender window he performs the act that defines the next 8 decades of Roman governance. In October of 97, he adopts Marcus Ulpius Traianus, the governor of Upper Germania, a career soldier born in Italica in the province of Hispania Baetica. It is the first time a man with no blood connection to the imperial house ascends by formal adoption alone. When Nerva dies in January of 98, the transition is seamless. No legions march on Rome, no senators are proscribed. The principle of adoptive succession has replaced dynastic accident, and the empire enters its golden age. Trajan arrives in Rome not as a courtier, but as a commander, tall, broad-shouldered, known for sharing his soldiers' rations on campaign. He immediately launches public works on a scale unseen since Augustus. The Forum of Trajan, designed by the architect Apollodorus of Damascus, surpasses every earlier imperial forum in size and ambition. A vast colonnaded plaza opens onto a basilica. Twin libraries flank a courtyard, and at its center rises Trajan's Column, a shaft of Carrara marble nearly 40 meters high, its surface spiraling with over 2,500 carved figures depicting the Dacian Wars. Those wars, fought between 101 and 106, bring the gold mines of Transylvania under Roman control and add the province of Dacia to the empire. The wealth finances an alimenta program, providing grain and support for impoverished children across Italian towns. Trajan's markets, a multi-level complex of shops and administrative offices built into the Quirinal hillside, function as the commercial heart of the capital. By 117, Trajan has pushed Roman boundaries to their farthest extent, briefly annexing Mesopotamia and capturing the Parthian capital of Ctesiphon. He dies in August of that year in Cilicia, and his ashes are placed beneath his column, the only emperor ever buried within the city walls. Hadrian, his adopted successor, reverses the policy of expansion. He withdraws from Mesopotamia, consolidates the eastern frontier, and turns the empire's energy inward. In Britain, beginning in 122, legionaries construct a stone wall stretching 80 Roman miles from the Solway Firth to the Tyne, a barrier of dressed stone, mile castles, turrets, and garrisoned forts that defines the northern limit of Roman civilization. At Tivoli, Hadrian builds a sprawling villa complex, replicating the architectural wonders he has seen in his ceaseless travels: Egyptian canals, Greek colonnades, landscaped pools reflecting the sky. In Rome itself, he reconstructs the Pantheon, crowning it with an unreinforced concrete dome spanning 43 meters, its central oculus open to the heavens. It remains the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world nearly 2,000 years later. Antoninus Pius succeeds Hadrian in 138 and governs for 23 years of remarkable stability. No major wars erupt, the treasury grows, Provincial cities flourish from Leptis Magna in North Africa to Ephesus in Asia Minor. The population of the empire reaches perhaps 60 to 70 million souls, connected by 400,000 kilometers of roads. Yet the calm does not hold. Marcus Aurelius, adopted by Antoninus and elevated to the purple in 161, inherits an empire under siege. Parthian armies invade the east. Germanic Marcomanni and Quadi cross the frozen Danube and penetrate deep into Italy itself, reaching Aquileia. Marcus spends nearly his entire reign in military camps along the northern frontier, directing campaigns through bitter winters. In those camps, by lamplight, he writes the private philosophical journal known as the Meditations, reflections on duty, impermanence, and the discipline of the rational mind. Meanwhile, returning legions carry the Antonine plague, likely smallpox, which devastates the empire between 165 and 180, killing perhaps 5 million people and hollowing out frontier garrisons and farming communities alike. Marcus Aurelius dies at Vindobona on the Danube in March of 180, exhausted and grieving, having broken the adoptive principle by leaving the throne to his biological son Commodus. The Golden Age ends not with invasion or revolution, but with a father's hope that blood might carry wisdom. It does not. The city never sleeps, not truly. Before dawn, the rumble of heavy carts echoes through narrow streets. Wheeled traffic is banned during daylight hours, so grain, timber, marble, and amphorae of olive oil move through Rome in darkness. By first light, 1 million people stir inside a city barely 13 miles in circumference. Rome, in the 1st and 2nd centuries of the Common Era, is the largest urban concentration the Western world has ever known, and its density is staggering. Families of 6 or 8 crowd into single rooms on the upper floors of insulae. Apartment blocks rising 5, 6, sometimes 7 stories above streets so narrow that neighbors on opposite sides can nearly touch hands across the gap. The ground floors house bakeries, taverns, fullers, and cobblers. The smell of fresh bread mingles with the sharper odors of urine vats used to bleach wool and the smoke of charcoal braziers that serve as the only heating in winter. 11 aqueducts feed the capital, delivering roughly 1 million cubic meters of water daily through a system of channels, settling tanks, and lead and terracotta pipes. Public fountains stand at nearly every intersection. The great thermae, the baths of Trajan, later those of Caracalla, are not mere washing facilities, but vast social complexes with libraries, gardens, exercise courts, and heated pools. Admission costs a quadrans, the smallest bronze coin, and even the poor can afford entry. Bathing is a daily ritual that cuts across class, though senators and freedmen do not share the same hour. Beyond the capital, the pattern repeats in miniature across 60 million lives. Provincial cities from Londinium to Leptis Magna organize themselves around a forum, a basilica for legal proceedings, a temple precinct, and at least 1 bathhouse. The road network stretches approximately 400,000 kilometers, binding this world together with engineered surfaces of gravel, sand, and fitted stone. A merchant in Antioch can ship Syrian glassware to Gaul in weeks. Indian pepper, Chinese silk, and Arabian incense reach Roman markets through Red Sea ports and overland caravan routes. The social order is rigid and visible. Senators wear the broad purple stripe on their togas, equestrians the narrow stripe. Freeborn citizens possess legal rights that slaves do not: the right to vote, to marry under Roman law, to appeal a magistrate's sentence. Slaves, perhaps 15 to 20% of the Italian population, work in mines, fields, households, and workshops. Some are educated Greeks who tutor children and manage accounts. Others die in chain gangs quarrying stone. Manumission is common enough that freedmen form a distinct and economically powerful class, though social stigma follows them for a generation. Women manage households, own property, and in practice wield influence that formal law does not fully reflect. Elite women control substantial estates. Funerary inscriptions across the empire honor midwives, merchants, and priestesses. Girls receive elementary education alongside boys, though advanced rhetoric and philosophy remain largely male preserves. Life expectancy at birth hovers between 25 and 35 years, dragged down by infant mortality. Perhaps 1 in 3 children dies before age 5. Religion saturates daily existence. Every household maintains a lararium, a small shrine to the Laras and Penates, the protective spirits of family and home. State religion centers on the great temples, Jupiter on the Capitoline, Mars in the Forum of Augustus, but mystery cults from the East gain devoted followings. The worship of Isis, Mithras, and Cybele offers personal salvation and communal ritual that traditional Roman religion does not emphasize. Small communities of Christians and Jews gather in private houses, their practices sometimes tolerated, sometimes suspect. The grain dole feeds roughly 200,000 recipients in Rome alone. The Annona system ships Egyptian and North African wheat across the Mediterranean in vast convoys to Ostia and Portus. Gladiatorial games and chariot races in the Circus Maximus, which seats perhaps 250,000, provide the other half of the social contract, spectacle as civic binding. The roar of the crowd carries across the Palatine Hill, reaching the imperial residence itself. This is the machinery of Roman life at its fullest. Water, bread, stone, law, and the endless hum of a civilization that believes, with some reason, that it encompasses the entire world worth knowing. That civilization, so confident in its permanence, begins to crack from within before any barbarian sword touches its walls. Marcus Aurelius dies at Vindobona on the Danube frontier in 180, and the throne passes to his son Commodus, the first natural-born heir to succeed in nearly a century. The philosopher-emperor's careful system of adoptive succession ends with a young man who has no interest in governance and every appetite for spectacle. Commodus renames the months of the calendar after his own titles, fights as a gladiator in the arena, and identifies himself with Hercules in marble portraits, showing him draped in a lion's skin. The Senate endures these humiliations in silence. The Praetorian prefect and a palace conspiracy do not. On the last night of 192, Commodus is strangled in his bath by a wrestler named Narcissus. What follows is a year of blood. Pertinax, a respected senator, takes the purple and attempts fiscal reform. The Praetorian Guard murders him after 87 days. The guardsmen then auction the empire to the highest bidder, Didius Julianus, who reportedly offers 25,000 sesterces per soldier. 3 provincial armies refuse to recognize the sale. Septimius Severus marches from Pannonia, Pescennius Niger rises in Syria, Clodius Albinus claims power from Britain. Severus reaches Rome first, disbands the old Praetorian Guard, and spends 4 years eliminating his rivals. By 197, he rules alone. The Severan dynasty governs for nearly 4 decades, but its character is military to the core. Septimius Severus reportedly advises his sons to enrich the soldiers and ignore everyone else. He expands the army, raises legionary pay, and stations a legion on the Alban Hills near Rome itself, a garrison force within Italy for the first time since Augustus. His son Caracalla murders his brother Geta in their mother's arms in 211 and extends Roman citizenship to virtually all free inhabitants of the empire through the Constitutio Antoniniana of 212, a measure likely designed to broaden the tax base. Caracalla is assassinated by a guardsman in 217. The dynasty staggers on through Elagabalus and Severus Alexander until 235, when mutinous soldiers kill Alexander and his mother in a camp on the Rhine. The murder of Severus Alexander opens a chasm. For the next 50 years, the empire endures what later historians call the crisis of the 3rd century. More than 50 men claim imperial authority between 235 and 284. Most die violently within months. Maximinus Thrax, the first soldier emperor of purely military origin, never even visits Rome during his reign. Gothic raiders cross the Danube and sack cities in Greece and Asia Minor. Alemanni breach the Rhine frontier. The Sassanid Persian Empire under Shapur I captures Emperor Valerian at the Battle of Edessa in 260, the only Roman emperor ever taken prisoner by a foreign enemy. Sassanid rock reliefs at Nakshi Rostam show Valerian kneeling before Shapur on horseback. The empire fractures. In the west, Postumus establishes the breakaway Gallic Empire, governing Gaul, Britain, and Hispania with its own senate and consuls. In the east, Zenobia of Palmyra extends her authority over Syria, Egypt, and much of Asia Minor, ruling in the name of her young son Vabalathus. The Central Empire, reduced to Italy, the Balkans, and parts of North Africa, seems on the verge of permanent dissolution. The plague of Cyprian, possibly smallpox or a hemorrhagic fever, ravages cities from 249 onward, killing thousands daily in Rome at its peak. Currency collapses. The silver Antoninianus, once a reliable coin, becomes a bronze disc with the thinnest wash of silver. Trade networks contract. Cities that had stood open for centuries now hastily build walls from dismantled temples and tombstones. Restoration comes through military emperors of Illyrian origin. Gallienus creates mobile cavalry units detached from the legions, a tactical revolution. Claudius II defeats the Goths at Naissus in 269. Aurelian, the most formidable of them all, reconquers the Palmyrene Empire in 272 and the Gallic Empire in 274, reuniting the Roman world. He builds massive new walls around Rome, 12 miles of brick-faced concrete, 19 feet high, studded with towers, an admission that the capital itself is no longer safe. Aurelian is assassinated in 275, but the pattern holds. The empire survives, battered and transformed, its old confidence shattered, its institutions strained beyond recognition, waiting for the hand that will reshape it entirely. That hand belongs to a soldier from the Dalmatian coast. Diocles, born to a family of freedmen near Salona, has risen through the ranks of the army by sheer competence. In November of 284, the troops at Nicomedia proclaim him emperor. He takes the name Diocletian, and within months he demonstrates a political intelligence the empire has not seen in generations. He understands that one man cannot govern a realm stretching from Britain to Mesopotamia. cannot simultaneously fight Persians on the Euphrates and Germanic tribes on the Rhine. The problem is structural, not personal, and his solution is radical. In 285, Diocletian elevates his comrade Maximian to the rank of co-emperor Augustus of the West, while Diocletian himself governs the east from Nicomedia in Asia Minor. In 293, the system expands further. 2 junior emperors called Caesars are appointed beneath the 2 Augusti, Constantius Chlorus in the west and Galerius in the east. This is the tetrarchy, the rule of 4. Each ruler governs a defined territory, maintains his own court, commands his own armies. The empire is not divided. It remains one state under one legal system, but its administration is distributed across 4 capitals: Nicomedia, Antioch, Milan, and Trier. Rome itself, symbolically supreme, becomes an administrative backwater. Diocletian rebuilds the machinery of government from the ground up. The old provinces, some vast enough to serve as power bases for usurpers, are broken into over 100 smaller units, grouped into 12 dioceses, themselves organized under 4 praetorian prefectures. The army swells to perhaps 400,000 soldiers or more, with frontier garrison troops called limitanae and mobile field armies called comitatenses. Taxation is reformed through a new census system that assesses land and population together, binding peasants to their soil to ensure revenue. The currency, debased beyond recognition during the crisis, is restabilized. In 301, the Edict on Maximum Prices attempts to cap the cost of goods and wages across the empire. Over 1,000 items listed on stone inscriptions erected in marketplaces from Antioch to Athens. The edict largely fails, but its ambition reveals the scale of Diocletian's vision. In 303, Diocletian launches the Great Persecution against Christians, the most systematic assault the faith has endured. Churches are demolished, scriptures burned, clergy imprisoned. The persecution falls unevenly, savage in the east under Galerius, half-hearted in the west under Constantius. Then, in 305, Diocletian does something no Roman emperor has ever done. He abdicates, retiring to a vast fortified palace at Spalatum on the Dalmatian coast, its walls enclosing baths, temples, and apartments built from gleaming white limestone. He compels Maximian to abdicate alongside him. The tetrarchy collapses almost immediately. Within 2 years, 6 men claim imperial authority. Civil war consumes the empire once more. From this chaos, one figure emerges. Constantine, son of Constantius Chlorus, is proclaimed Augustus by his father's troops at Eboracum in Britain in 306. He spends 6 years consolidating power in the west before marching on Rome against the usurper Maxentius. On the 28th of October, 312, the 2 armies meet at the Milvian Bridge over the Tiber. Constantine's soldiers carry a new symbol on their shields, the Chi Rho, the first 2 letters of Christ's name in Greek. Maxentius drowns in the river. Constantine enters Rome as sole master of the West. In 313, Constantine and his eastern co-emperor Licinius issue the Edict of Milan, granting legal toleration to all religions, including Christianity. By 324, Constantine defeats Licinius and rules the entire empire alone. He convenes the Council of Nicaea in 325, where bishops from across the Roman world define Orthodox Christian doctrine in the Nicene Creed. He commissions the first great Christian basilicas, Old St. Peter's over the Apostles' traditional grave, the Lateran Basilica in Rome, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. His most consequential act is architectural. On the site of ancient Byzantium, at the narrow strait where Europe meets Asia, Constantine founds a new capital. Dedicated on the 11th of May, 330, Constantinople rises with forums, a hippodrome, a senate house, and massive walls. It is a Christian city from birth, adorned with churches rather than pagan temples. Constantine rules from this new Rome until his death on the 22nd of May, 337, receiving baptism on his deathbed. He leaves behind an empire transformed, its administration restructured, its army rebuilt, its faith redirected, its center of gravity shifted permanently eastward. Constantine's sons inherit a Christian empire and immediately drench it in family blood. Constantine II, Constantius II, and Constans divide the realm among themselves in 337, but not before the army massacres nearly every other male relative to simplify the succession. Constantine II dies invading his brother's territory in 340. Constans rules the West until a usurper murders him in 350. Constantius II, the last surviving son, reunites the empire under a single Augustus, ruling from Constantinople with an iron commitment to Arian Christianity that sets him against Nicene bishops across the West. Church councils convene and dissolve in acrimony. Bishops are exiled, recalled, exiled again. The theological disputes that Constantine the Father left unresolved now fracture the clergy into hostile camps, and the emperor's court becomes the arena where doctrine is decided by imperial decree as much as by scripture. When Constantius dies in 361, the purple passes to the last surviving male of the dynasty, Julian, raised in fearful seclusion, educated in Athens, and secretly devoted to the old gods. Julian strips the Christian clergy of their privileges, reopens pagan temples, and attempts to revive traditional sacrifice. He forbids Christian teachers from instructing in classical literature. His reign is brilliant, brief, and doomed. Leading a massive campaign against Sassanid Persia, Julian takes a mortal wound from a spear near Ctesiphon in June of 363. The pagan revival dies with him on the banks of the Tigris. The decades that follow belong to the frontier. Beyond the Danube and the Rhine, entire peoples are in motion. The Huns, mounted steppe warriors of terrifying speed, press westward from the Pontic grasslands, shattering the Gothic kingdoms of the Black Sea region. In 376, tens of thousands of Goths, Tavingi and Grothungi, appear on the northern bank of the Danube, begging Emperor Valens for permission to cross into Roman territory. Valens admits them, hoping to settle them as farmer soldiers. But Roman officials exploit the refugees, selling them dog meat at extortionate prices, and the Goths revolt. On the 9th of August, 378, outside the city of Adrianople in Thrace, Gothic cavalry smashes the Roman left flank and encircles the Imperial infantry. 2/3 of the Eastern Field Army perishes in the dust. Valens himself is killed, his body never recovered. Theodosius I, summoned from Hispania to salvage the East, spends years rebuilding the army and settling the Goths as federati within imperial borders, allied peoples under their own leaders, fighting for Rome but never fully absorbed. In 380, the Edict of Thessalonica declares Nicene Christianity the sole legitimate faith of the Roman state. Pagan temples close across the empire. In 391, the great Serapeum of Alexandria, repository of centuries of learning, is destroyed by a Christian mob with imperial sanction. The old gods retreat into private devotion and rural memory. Theodosius dies in Milan in January of 395, and the empire splits for the last time. His elder son Arcadius receives the east, governing from Constantinople. His younger son Honorius, a boy of 10, receives the west, sheltered in the marsh-protected capital of Ravenna. Real power in the west belongs to the Magister Militum Stilicho, a general of Vandal descent and Roman training, who twice defeats the Visigothic king Alaric, at Pollentia in 402 and Verona in 403. But court intrigue destroys what battlefield skill preserves. In 408, Honorius has Stilicho executed on suspicion of treason. The Western army massacres the families of barbarian federati, driving thousands of Gothic soldiers into Alaric's ranks. Alaric besieges Rome 3 times. On the 24th of August, 410, his Visigoths enter through the Salarian Gate. For 3 days they plunder a city that has not fallen to a foreign enemy in 8 centuries. Gold and silver vanish from senatorial palaces. The gilded bronze tiles of temples are stripped. Refugees stream into North Africa and the eastern provinces, carrying with them a shattering realization. Jerome, writing from Bethlehem, captures the moment. The city that conquered the world has itself been conquered. The empire endures, its eastern half intact, its western half still nominally governed from Ravenna. But something irreplaceable has broken. The aura of Roman invincibility, sustained across 40 generations, dissolves in 3 August days. Ravenna sits behind marshes. The imperial court, withdrawn from Rome even before Alaric's assault, governs what remains of the western provinces from behind walls surrounded by shallow lagoons and mist. Mosaics glitter inside its churches and palace chapels, Christ enthroned in gold tesserae, saints processing in jeweled robes, while beyond the marshes the political map of Western Europe dissolves year by year. Honorius, the emperor who lost Rome, dies in 423 without an heir. The Eastern court installs Valentinian III, a child of 6, under the regency of his mother, Galla Placidia. Real power, however, belongs to the generals, and the generals are increasingly of barbarian origin, or depend on barbarian federates to fill the ranks that Roman citizens no longer volunteer to join. The Vandals, under their king Gaiseric, cross from Spain into North Africa in 429. Within a decade they seize Carthage, the granary that feeds Rome. The date is 439, and it is catastrophic. North Africa's tax revenues and grain shipments, which have sustained the Western treasury and the urban population of Rome for centuries, are severed at a stroke. Gaiseric builds a fleet and turns the Western Mediterranean into a Vandal sea, raiding Sicily, Sardinia, and the Italian coastline with impunity. The Western Empire's fiscal base collapses. Meanwhile, the Visigoths consolidate a kingdom spanning southern Gaul and much of Hispania. The Burgundians settle in the Rhone Valley. The Franks press into northern Gaul. Britain, abandoned by Roman garrisons around 410, fragments into local warlordships. Each territory retains elements of Roman administration, tax collection, road maintenance, Latin literacy among elites, but allegiance to Ravenna becomes nominal, then fictional. Into this disintegrating world rides Attila. The Hunnic Empire, stretching from the Pannonian Plain to the steppes beyond the Black Sea, has extracted tribute from Constantinople for years. Now Attila turns west. In 451, his vast army, Huns, Ostrogoths, Gepids, and subject peoples, pours into Gaul. The Roman general Flavius Aetius, the last commander capable of assembling a coalition, forges an extraordinary alliance with the Visigoths under their king Theodoric I. At the Battle of the Catalonian Plains near modern Chalons, the combined Roman and Visigothic force halts Attila's advance. Theodoric dies in the fighting. Attila withdraws but invades Italy the following year, sacking Aquileia so thoroughly that refugees flee into the lagoons that will one day become Venice. He turns back before reaching Rome, and in 453 he dies, reportedly of a hemorrhage on his wedding night. The Hunnic Empire fragments almost overnight. Aetius does not long survive his triumph. Valentinian III, suspicious of his general's power, personally stabs Aetius to death in 454. Months later, Valentinian himself is murdered by soldiers loyal to the dead general. The Western throne becomes a prize fought over by Germanic warlords and Roman aristocratic factions. In 455, Geiseric's Vandals sail from Carthage and sack Rome for 14 days, methodically stripping bronze roof tiles from temples, carrying off the golden menorah looted from Jerusalem nearly 4 centuries earlier, and taking the empress and her daughters as captives. The city of Rome, once home to 1 million souls, now holds perhaps 100,000. Aqueducts crack. Forums stand half empty. Grass grows between paving stones on roads that once carried the commerce of 3 continents. Between 455 and 476, 9 men claim the Western throne. Most are puppets of Germanic strongmen. The Eastern Emperor in Constantinople remains the sole legitimate source of imperial authority, but his interventions in the West repeatedly fail. Finally, on the 4th of September, 476, the Germanic chieftain Odoacer deposes the last Western emperor, a teenager bearing the bitterly ironic name Romulus Augustulus, echoing both the city's mythical founder and its first emperor. Odoacer does not claim the title for himself. Instead, he sends the imperial regalia, the purple robe, the diadem, to Constantinople, declaring that the West needs no separate emperor. The Eastern Emperor Zeno accepts. No battle marks the moment, no crowd riots. The Western Roman Empire ends not with a final siege, but with a quiet, bureaucratic transfer. In Ravenna, the throne room stands empty. Yet Roman law persists. Latin endures. The Church administers. The fall is real, but the inheritance refuses to die. Constantinople does not mourn the West. The eastern capital thrives behind the triple line of the Theodosian walls, its harbors crowded with grain ships from Egypt, its treasury solvent, its bureaucracy intact. Greek is the language of the streets, but Latin remains the language of law, and the emperors who rule from the sacred palace on the Marmara shore still call themselves Roman. The population approaches 500,000. The hippodrome roars with chariot factions. The city is the largest and wealthiest in the Christian world, and it intends to remain so. In 527, Justinian ascends the throne. Born a peasant son in Illyria, elevated by his uncle Justin, he carries an ambition that matches the old empire's scope. Within 5 years, he orders the jurist Tribonian to compile the entire body of Roman law, centuries of statutes, opinions, and precedents, into a single coherent work. The result? The Corpus Juris Civilis, completed between 529 and 534, becomes the foundation of European civil law for the next 1,500 years. Simultaneously, Justinian rebuilds. After the catastrophic Nika riots of 532 nearly topple his reign, he raises the Hagia Sophia in just 5 years. Its dome, spanning over 30 meters, floats on a ring of 40 windows, filling the interior with light that seems to dissolve the very stone. Nothing like it exists anywhere on earth. His generals Belisarius and Narses reconquer Vandal North Africa by 534, reclaim Italy after 2 decades of grinding war, and seize a strip of southern Spain. The Mediterranean is briefly a Roman lake again. But the cost is staggering. Italy lies devastated. And in 541, bubonic plague arrives in Constantinople, killing perhaps a quarter of the empire's population over repeated waves. Justinian himself falls ill and survives, but his restored empire never fully recovers. The 7th century brings existential crisis. Sassanid Persia overruns Syria, Egypt, and Anatolia before Emperor Heraclius mounts a desperate counteroffensive, defeating the Persians by 628. Yet both empires have bled themselves hollow, and from the Arabian Peninsula a new force emerges. Arab armies inspired by Islam conquer Syria by 636, Egypt by 642, and North Africa by the century's end. Constantinople itself endures 2 massive Arab sieges, in 674 through 678, and again in 717 through 718. Greek fire, a devastating incendiary weapon sprayed from bronze siphons onto enemy ships, saves the capital both times. The empire contracts and transforms. The old provincial system gives way to themes, military administrative districts where soldier farmers defend their own land. Greek fully replaces Latin in administration. The iconoclasm controversy tears the church apart for over a century, before icon veneration is restored in 843. Then renewal comes. The Macedonian dynasty, reigning from 867 to 1025, presides over a cultural and military renaissance. Byzantine armies push back into Syria, retake Antioch, and project power across the Balkans. Constantinople's scholars preserve and copy classical Greek texts that would otherwise vanish from history. The catastrophe at Manzikert in 1071, where Seljuk Turks capture Emperor Romanos IV, opens Anatolia to Turkish settlement and begins the empire's long territorial erosion. The call for Western military aid leads to the Crusades, and the Fourth Crusade delivers a wound worse than any Muslim conquest. In 1204, Crusader armies sack Constantinople itself, looting its treasures, melting its bronzes, and establishing a Latin empire on the Bosphorus. The Palaiologos dynasty recovers the capital in 1261, but the restored empire is a shadow, a city-state with fragments of territory, dependent on Italian naval powers and surrounded by the rising Ottoman Turks. By 1453, Sultan Mehmed II masses over 80,000 troops and enormous bronze cannons before the Theodosian walls. Constantinople's garrison numbers perhaps 7,000. The siege lasts 53 days. On the 29th of May, Ottoman soldiers breach the walls near the gate of Saint Romanos. The last emperor, Constantine XI Palaiologos, dies fighting in the breach. The city falls. The Hagia Sophia becomes a mosque. 1,000 years of continuous Roman governance east of the Adriatic ends in a single morning. Yet the Corpus Juris Civilis endures in every European law library. Byzantine scholars fleeing west carry manuscripts that ignite the Renaissance. The Roman inheritance once again outlives the state that carried it. The state dies, but its grammar survives. In the monasteries of Ireland, Northumbria, and the Italian highlands, monks bend over parchment through the 6th and 7th centuries, copying Latin texts by candlelight. They preserve Virgil, Cicero, Livy, and the Vulgate Bible in scriptoria, where the only sounds are the scratch of quill on vellum and the murmur of prayer. Latin ceases to be a living tongue of the marketplace, yet it becomes the universal language of the Western Church, of diplomacy, of philosophy, of medicine. For more than 1,000 years after the last Western emperor surrenders his diadem, every educated European reads, writes, and argues in the language of Rome. Meanwhile, on the lips of farmers, merchants, and soldiers across former imperial provinces, spoken Latin fractures and evolves. By the 9th century, distinct vernaculars emerge, the ancestors of Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian. Today, nearly 1.5 billion people worldwide speak a Romance language descended directly from the tongue of Roman legionaries and tax collectors. The law proves equally tenacious. Justinian's Corpus Juris Civilis, compiled in Constantinople in the 530s, resurfaces in Western Europe during the 11th century, when scholars at Bologna begin systematic study of its texts. The principles they extract, legal personhood, contractual obligation, property rights, the presumption of innocence, flow into the canon law of the Church, the civil codes of medieval kingdoms, and eventually the legal foundations of modern nation-states. Napoleon's Civil Code of 1804 draws explicitly on Roman jurisprudence. Through French colonial expansion, those principles spread across 4 continents. Today, over 150 nations ground their legal systems in traditions traceable to Roman law. The Church itself becomes Rome's most enduring institutional heir. The Bishop of Rome assumes the title Pontifex Maximus, once held by Augustus. Dioceses mirror provincial boundaries. The administrative language remains Latin. The papal curia operates with a bureaucratic continuity that would be recognizable to any late imperial prefect. On Christmas Day in the year 800, Pope Leo III crowns the Frankish king Charlemagne as Emperor of the Romans, inaugurating the Holy Roman Empire, a political entity that persists in various forms until 1806, claiming direct succession from the Caesars. The Renaissance of the 14th and 15th centuries transforms Rome's physical ruins into a classroom. Artists measure the Pantheon's dome, still standing after nearly 2,000 years, its unreinforced concrete span of 43 meters unmatched until the modern era. Architects study Vitruvius. Sculptors excavate marble fragments from the Forum. Brunelleschi's dome in Florence, Palladio's villas in the Veneto, and Michelangelo's design for St. Peter's Basilica all speak the formal language of Roman architecture, translated into new materials and ambitions. When Enlightenment thinkers seek models for government without kings, they turn to the Roman Republic. The framers of the American Constitution in 1787 deliberately adopt Roman vocabulary, Senate, Capitol, Republic, and Roman symbols. The eagle, the fasces, the columned portico of public buildings all echo imperial and republican iconography. The Capitol Dome in Washington rises on a hill consciously named for the Capitoline. Modern Rome itself embodies this layered inheritance. The Pantheon functions as a church. Trajan's markets house a museum. The Colosseum stands open to the sky, its travertine arches framing a city of 3 million. Aqueduct ruins stride across the Campagna. Beneath the streets, the Cloaca Maxima, first engineered under the kings, still drains water to the Tiber. Roman road alignments underlie modern highways from London to Baghdad. The grid-patterned cities planted by legionary colonies, Timgad, Cologne, Barcelona, Turin, retain their ancient street plans beneath modern asphalt. Latin survives in scientific nomenclature, legal maxims, and the liturgy of the Catholic Church. The concepts of citizenship, constitution, republic, and empire that structure modern political thought are Roman words carrying Roman meanings across 25 centuries. The state that began as a cluster of mud huts on the Palatine Hill became the longest-lived political experiment in Western history. Its roads, its laws, its language, and its idea of universal belonging outlasted every wall and legion. The machine stopped, but its gears still turn. Thank you for watching this journey through the full arc of Roman civilization. If this series has deepened your understanding of the ancient world, please subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new exploration of history.